David Ragan, a 13-year pioneer on the NASCAR Cup circuit, is currently cherishing his final races on the tour. Once a freshman racer, has become an ingrained veteran with Front Row Motorsports. 2 wins and 40 top 10 finishes have earned him more success than hundreds of stock car drivers before him. What many people forget, however, is his tenure with the Cat in the Hat. David Ragan was considered a top prospect for Roush Fenway racing throughout the late 2000s into the early 2010s. Coupling his venture into the NASCAR Cup Series and his topsy-turvy driver development, David Ragan is easily Roush's most intriguing prospect to date. So the year is 2006. While Joe Gibbs Racing and Hendrick Motorsports have strong rosters, they can't compete to the star power of Roush Fenway Racing. Matt Kenseth, Greg Biffle, and Carl Edwards all competing on a top-tier level, with Jamie McMurray a win away from breaking out. At the top, however, was seasoned veteran and patriarch of the organization Mark Martin. For nearly 2 decades, the Arkansas driver helped morph Roush from an upstart single-car operation into an empire. 35 wins, multiple crown jewel victories at Darlington and Charlotte, and a championship contender nearly every single campaign. The 6 team finished top 10 in points for all but 3 of Mark's 19 full-time campaigns. That 2006 campaign, Mark Martin was making a late postseason run at championship number 1. Sitting 10 points behind Jeff Burton, the quest to not finish runner-up was on. Until J.J. Yeley ran out of talent at Charlotte, which marked out the veteran from claiming the title. Still, at the gray age of 47, Mark Martin netted 7 top 5s, 15 top 10 finishes, and led 292 circuits out front. Woefully strong relationships are almost always bound for an expiration date. Mark Martin chose to step away from full-time competition and raced the 0-1 for Gen Racing in 2007. This swan song was actually supposed to take place in 2005, with Jamie McMurray succeeding Mark in the number 6. Plans changed when Kurt Busch was arrested for DUI, and his release from Roush Fenway Racing opened up the renumbered 26 car. Lacking a development driver, the Cat in the Hat convinced Mark Martin to return for 1 more year. For the longest time, it seemed to be Todd Cleaver looking to be the heir to Mark Martin's throne. He had decent numbers in the Truck Series, 6 top 5s and 12 top 10 finishes in the number 50 F-150. Once he got into stock cars, that's where the wheels fell off the hype train. Competing in the 06 in Xfinity, he only scored 4 top 10s and had a depressing average finish of 23rd. His NASCAR Cup Series numbers were even worse. 2 crashes, a best finish of 32nd, and 3 DNQs. It's safe to say the 3M sponsorship came in handy considering the mangled sheet metal on a racely basis. With these results all listed under Jack Roush, his career in NASCAR was effectively ceased completely. The next Roush prospect flowing through the pipeline was David Ragan. On October 11, 2006, he was announced as the driver for the number 6 AAA insurance Ford Fusion with veteran crew chief Jimmy Fenning on the War Wagon. His prior NASCAR experience, you ask? How about only a partial campaign in both ARCA and trucks, with only 7 career starts in Xfinity? Now, I was only a mere 6 years and 1 day old at the time, but I'm quite sure a bit of team owners and media members were scratching their heads at this revelation. Back in the late 2000s, of course, there were some other intriguing drivers getting rides with little experience. Fellow Rookie of the Year contender David Gilliland, as well as NASCAR champion today Joey Logano. Both of these racers, however, at the very least won a race in Xfinity before receiving full-time Cup endeavors. David Ragan had a mere 4 straight top 10s in trucks and a best Xfinity finish of 18th. Even more bemusing, it was Mark Martin himself that handpicked Ragan as his replacement, and Jack Roush had strong faith in his abilities from day 1. On paper, however, he was destined to become a massive flop and junked some equipment in year 1. To begin 2007, the new era actually got off to a promising start. A top 5 in Daytona and a 16th at Fontana placed the 6th 5th in the season point standings. Things quickly plummeted from there. Thank goodness this team had AAA insurance, because David Ragan was one of the more accident-prone drivers in the field. 26 crashes and incidents certainly won't appease many of your fellow competitors. Yet, somehow he only managed 4 DNFs and finished 23rd in the season point standings. His rookie campaign was not good, but it could have been substantially worse considering his inexperience driving stock cars. To the fortunes of Ragan's career, Jack Roush fielded the 6th team in Xfinity exclusively to develop his talents. Paired with Mike Kelly, the discount team was a tire fire on some occasions, but they earned 4 top 5s and 9 top 10s. This was nothing compared to Carl Edwards' rookie Xfinity campaign in 2005, yet Edwards had 2 developmental years in the Truck Series. David Ragan, meanwhile, was still adapting to the top-level racing on top of the much harder to drive stock cars. 2008 might see a slight increase in results, but they've got a lot of work before he becomes a contender. Putting that to mind, David Ragan was one of the biggest surprises of 2008, a total outlier to the infamous sophomore slump. Starting with Xfinity, his lap completion percentage increased by 6%. That maturity carried into the Cup circuit as he began to gel really well with Jimmy Fenning. 6 top 5s, 14 top 10 finishes, and a 13th place finish in points put the iconic 6 back on the map. Ragan's progression was an eye-opener to the Cup Series garage. He proved that Roush could transition a no-name kid into a skilled, consistent racer in little less than 2 years. This increase saw added exposure and TV time, which meant a new primary sponsor. UPS, a highly respected company carried by Dale Jarrett, would fund all 36 of Ragan's races. The organization had another young, talented superstar to extend the legacy. David Ragan should easily become a first-time winner and make the 12-driver playoffs. And then we get to 2009, my goodness. Basically, the color of the UPS Ford Fusion also went for their performance. 11 top 20 finishes all season long. A team bankrolled by a full-time sponsor, and Roush engines got bested by Elliott Sadler during Evernham's downturn. Those 2 factors are enough to justify their garbage performance, but it gets even worse. At one point, the 6 hovered around the top 35 danger zone and needed help from Roush's engineering manager. This was a puzzling outcome considering Jimmy Fenning, David Ragan, and the entire team remained intact for the most part. The only pinpointed circumstance as to why they flopped so hard relies with Roush Fenway Racing. Carl Edwards went from an 8-race winner the campaign prior to checkerless in 2009. Greg Biffle was consistent but also lacked wins. Matt Kenseth and Jamie McMurray both won races, but neither the 17 nor the 26 teams made the playoffs. The organization as a whole was struggling to engineer faster cars and compete with the likes of Jimmy Johnson, Mark Martin, and Jeff Gordon. After the elimination of Jimmy McMurray's number 26 team, Roush Fenway recovered for a solid 2010 season. The Blue Oval Brigade combined for 4 wins, with Carl Edwards, Matt Kenseth, and Greg Biffle finishing 4th, 5th, and 6th in points respectively. David Ragan, meanwhile, overwent the same distressful and substandard results even with a new crew chief in Donnie Wingo. 3 top 10s, an average finish of 21.3, and a points ranking of 24th showed the results were not consistently delivered. In a way, he was in a similar position that Eric Jones currently is at JGR, heavily outshadowed and lacking a breakthrough campaign to get out of the organizational cellar. Despite his remarkable sophomore campaign, once again his abilities were at a low point. Even with 4 campaigns under his belt with minimal success, there was still hope in his talents. Under a part-time Xfinity basis in 2009, Ragan scored 5 top 5s, 15 top 10 finishes, and won 2 races. One of those I witnessed firsthand as David Ragan claimed the last great Coliseum. To do so, he had to fend off the likes of Carl Edwards, Matt Kenseth, and Kevin Harvick, 3 of the top drivers in the league. David Ragan proved he could duel door-to-door with NASCAR's best, but just couldn't figure out the NASCAR Cup Series. One driver overgoing a similar struggle, Brad Keselowski. In Xfinity, he was one of the top-tier drivers. On the NASCAR Cup circuit, however, the only noteworthy thing occurred off the track with Kyle Busch. In both cases, they were decent stock car drivers, but they just couldn't make that next leap into the top-tier category of the Cup Series. Besides Dale Jr., David Ragan definitely faced the most pressure to perform during the 2011 season. Year 5 at Roush, sponsor UPS was in a contract year with new prospects Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Trevor Bayne in the pipeline. Meanwhile, a fresh face would take over the headset and decision-makings for the UPS team. Drew Blickensderfer, his expertise, crew chief Carl Edwards, and Matt Kenseth to 12 Xfinity wins from 2007 to 2010. It would be fly or die for the 6th team, beginning with the Great American Race. During the 500-mile spectacle, Ragan found himself within clutches of the most storied trophy in NASCAR history. All he had to do was execute the restart zone and hold off 10 to 15 cars for all the glory. Unfortunately, a restart violation ended Ragan's visit with a Harley J. Earl trophy. The guy who went on to win the race, Roush prospect Trevor Bayne. In just his second career start, the Tennessee native had achieved more than David Ragan in 4 years. 5 months later, however, the annual July Daytona race provided a potential redemption story. Taking off from the 5th position, Ragan tandem well with teammate Matt Kenseth. Steering clear of the mid-pack fireworks and torn sheet metal, David Ragan was ever so close to claiming career win number 1. And lo and behold, on the final restart, he earned redemption from his February miscues. 163 races of failure and patience from Jack Roush had finally paid off. David Ragan was a NASCAR Cup Series winner. The victory instantly put Ragan into the wildcard conversation and improved to 13th departing New Hampshire. After all the years of ups and downs, successes and failures, David Ragan was finally thriving at Roush. That is, until the team completely prolapsed in the second half with only 7 top 20 finishes to end the season. David Ragan plummeted to 19th as the regular season concluded, well behind Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin for the wildcard positions. Once again, David Ragan's abilities to become a consistent contender were in question. With 3 years of constant underachievement and low bar results, UPS decided to pull their sponsorship. Once a full season partner would reduce its NASCAR involvement to just one race, a lone primary event with Carl Edwards. It was a tough business decision, but honestly, I can't blame them for essentially leaving the sport. On top of its deals with college athletics, UPS grew tired of getting outperformed by FedEx. Denny Hamlin and Joe Gibbs Racing won 13 races with the rivaling colors, and the 11 made the playoffs every year dating back to 2006. The best finish for UPS since Denny Hamlin's debut, 23rd in both 2006 and 2011. They simply took their losses with professional auto racing and ventured elsewhere. This was a death blow for Roush Fenway Racing, specifically the number 6 team. Crown Royal and Aflac were both out the door, so that left 3 cars without primary sponsorship. Because of this, the David Ragan era was officially over. On December 6, 2011, he was granted his release, thus ending a 5-year tenure with 1 win, 0 playoff appearances, and 4 points finishes outside the top 20. Even then, David Ragan should get a strong second chance to prove his worth. On the unemployment line, some high-caliber positions opened up as the season concluded. The 22 at Team Penske, easily a top 10 ride in the garage with the leadership of Steve Addington. Ironically, the stupidity of Kurt Busch could once again give Ragan the opportunity of a lifetime. Ultimately, Roger Penske went with AJ Allmendinger, which then opened up the 43 at Richard Petty Motorsports. It's a fairly mediocre ride, but they have a solid crew chief in Greg Irwin. The King ultimately shook hands with Eric Almirola and Smithfield. 7 years later, both driver and sponsor have a prime opportunity at Stewart-Haas Racing. Potentially, the 55 at MWR would have been another landing spot, but the roster was decided before Ragan's release. With no top-tier rides remaining, David Ragan was forced to settle. 1 month before the season, he signed a contract with Front Row Motorsports, remaining in the Ford camp for the foreseeable future. David Ragan's competitive career was over, although he subbed for Kyle Busch in 2015. Meanwhile, Roush of course lost Kenseth, Biffle, and Edwards and hasn't found that next-generation racer since. Rounding it out, David Ragan was simply the next guy up at the absolutely wrong time. His case relates similar to Daniel Suarez, except he at least had 2 years in the Xfinity division. In an alternate timeline, this is how David Ragan's transition should have played out. 3 years in Xfinity with the 6 team with Drew Blickensderfer on top of the box. The two developed chemistry and experience with Discount Tire funding the race team with some victories and even a championship to their resume. As for the vacant Cup seat, Jack Roush signs a guy like Brian Vickers for a short-term deal. Even more creative, maybe Roush accepts Mark Martin's plea for less racing time and makes the AAA team a rotational car. When the price is right, both David Ragan and Drew Blickensderfer get promoted in 2010. UPS likely signs elsewhere, but the closure of the 26 team sees co-primary sponsorship between Irwin Tools and Discount Tire. With stable sponsorship, an experienced racer, and top-notch Ford Fusions, David Ragan easily wins Rookie of the Year and makes the playoffs at least once. From there, it's anyone's guess as to how he progresses. Nonetheless, David Ragan will remain as one of the biggest head cases for the organization. So many highs, so many lows marked an unconventional 5-year roller coaster highlighting a potential long-term outcome. Unfortunately, that end result was never reached. At the very least, David Ragan has some cherishable moments as he hangs up the helmet. And who knows, maybe he has one last memory to close out his career. So anyways, this is NRF signing out, and just remember, life's a beach and then you drive.